Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Louisville Forum. I'm President Greg Condra. We meet the second Wednesday of every month at noon at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. Louisville Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information about the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make a reservation, please visit us at louisvilleforum.org. Louisville's murder rate. How do we reverse the trend? Louisville homicides have more than doubled since 2012. Last year, nearly 500 people were shot in Louisville. Just let that sink in. How big was your high school graduating class? 500 people were shot last year. The Pegasus Institute is a nonpartisan think tank led by millennials. It has advanced a plan called Louisville Initiative for Violence Eradication, or LIVE. Its major points are, number one, a focused deterrence policing strategy targeting street gangs. Tearing down abandoned buildings identified as crime hotspots using technology. Improving street lighting on vulnerable streets and neighborhoods. Tailored gang enforcement legislation passed by the state. Our speakers today are Josh Crawford with the Pegasus Institute, the group that put the plan forward. David Muchler, who's president of the LMPD Fraternal Order of Police. Todd Kessinger with the Major Crimes Unit at the LMPD. And Nicole Taylor, a shooting survivor. Nicole, who'll be speaking first, was pistol whipped, shot, and carjacked in July of 2017, all in front of her 4-year-old son. Yeah. Josh Crawford is co-executive director of the Pegasus Institute, a first-of-its-kind, millennial-led, Kentucky-based think tank. The Pegasus mission is to provide public policy research and solutions that help improve the lives of all Kentuckians. Pegasus Institute operates as an independent, nonpartisan, privately funded research organization focused on state and local policies. David Muchler. David began his career with the Louisville Division of Police in 1997 and was assigned to the 2nd District. In late 2003, he was deployed with his United States Marine Corps infantry company to serve in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He returned from Iraq in 2004, continued his duties as a patrol officer. In December of 2004, he was promoted to sergeant, and Sergeant Muchler was assigned to the LMPD's 7th Division, where he served as a late watch platoon sergeant for 2 years. In 2007, he was selected to lead the 7th Division Flex Platoon. In 2008, he transferred out of the 7th and went to work in the Inspections and Compliance Unit, where he served as the Court Liaison Sergeant. Having been a long-time Fraternal Order of Police member, but never having served as an elected delegate or board member, Dave took an interest in serving in an FOP leadership role. In 2009, he was nominated and eventually elected to serve as the president of Lodge 614. Dave is currently serving his 3rd term. Major Todd Kessinger, didn't get quite the background on you. I have here your commander of the Major Crimes Unit. And then we talked about Nicole. So our questioners today will be Dan Hartledge and Tom Van Der Rostein. They'll be around to pick up your written questions here soon. Nicole, I'll turn the microphone over to you. You want to come up to the podium?
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Taylor. I'm a victim of gun violence. I just want to take you back to July the 18th, 2017 at 5:45 in the morning. Me and my 4-year-old was coming out of our home. A man approached me and my 4-year-old. He pistol whipped me. He robbed me and shot me right in front of my 4-year-old. It's been very rough. There has been no aftermath of any kind, a lot of lack of communication. We've been struggling on a daily basis. We're now on medication, me and my 4-year-old, for depression, anxiety. The side effects of medicine is horrible. They still have not caught the person who's done this, so I'm paranoid every second. I'm watching my back. My 4-year-old, he doesn't like to come outdoors at all. Our lives have changed tremendously. It's went upside down. I haven't heard from the detectives at all. I got shot in my arm, so I can't work. I had to have surgery. So I'm going through some financial issues from that. So from getting a paycheck every 2 weeks to zero, nothing. It's been hard. I'm a single mom, so it's been rough. I feel like the justice system has failed us. I haven't heard anything at all since August of last year. I feel like my landlord has failed me as well. I'm still in the same place, so we can't sleep really, so it's been rough for that. Like I said, my financial situation is rough. It's very rough. I'm a nurse. I worked at Baptist East. I can't work at all. I have to have surgery again in March because my arm is not healing properly. So I'm currently disabled. And I don't know, it's just a lot of lack of communication. There's no one really to reach out to for help. You know, Christopher 2X, he's been wonderful. The whole Pegasus Institute, they've been very supportive. But far as like the detectives and that was working on my case, they haven't called me. They haven't got back with me on anything. Watching my 4-year-old being a happy child to just always sad and crying every second. He don't like to go outside. He don't like to play. He don't like to do anything anymore. It's just changed for him. It's really sad. And it's like I have really no one to turn to but God. He's my father. I mean, he's been with me this whole entire time. Without him, I don't know where I would be. Medication can only do so much. You know, I'm coping with that, but it's still rough for me and my family. So I just want justice for me and my 4-year-old. I want our lives to be back the same how it used to be, because he's not doing well at all. He's 4 on depression medicine. That's no way for a child to live. He doesn't sleep really or anything. So, and, you know, I have to be strong for him. You know, I can only do so much, but that's all. I don't know.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you.
So first, I would just like to thank the Louisville Forum for putting this together. I think this is a critically important issue for our city, and so I appreciate them being willing to put this together. It's very appropriate that Sergeant Muchler and Major Kessinger are here today, one day after Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, and so I thank them both for what they do for the city and for being here today. And from 2003 to 2017, the entirety of metro government in Louisville, we've had just under 1,000 homicides and just over 1,000 homicides and just under 3,100 admissions to U of L Hospital for penetrative gun wounds. Now, those are numbers, but Nicole Taylor, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of months, is one of those 3,100 individuals. As important as those numbers are, each one of those numbers represents a person like Nicole who has had their life fundamentally altered. And so I just sort of want to give an overview of where the city has been, where the city is, and sort of what the plan is that we put together. From 2003 to 2014, Louisville averaged 56.9 homicides a year. That put us in the bottom quarter of a city our size, of the top 100 largest cities in the country. And then things changed in 15 and 16. Things changed all over the country in 2015 and 2016. But that spike going from 56 homicides in 2014 to 118 homicides in 2016 was not only a uniquely large spike for Louisville in its history, but a uniquely large spike for a city in a time where most of the large cities in the country were experiencing increases in homicide. And so what we wanted to do is to take a look at that and say, okay, what's causing it and what can be done about it? And from our perspective, the causes really come down to a couple of things. The first is street gangs. The second is illegal guns and access to illegal guns. And the third is the reduction in self-initiated activity by police over that time period. And so how can we put together a plan that addresses those things? And so what we tried to do was to address those things. And so the first thing that was mentioned is a focused deterrence policing strategy. That's a strategy that focuses police resources on individuals who are repeat offenders and who commit the overwhelming majority of our violence. One of the sort of dirty little secrets in criminal justice is that the overwhelming majority of crime is committed by a very, very small number of people. And so focusing police resources on those individuals and the individuals and groups that they associate with is a way to direct police resources to address that. The second prong deals with environmental factors. That is abandoned buildings and street lighting. The environment in which crime occurs matters. One-block street segments with abandoned buildings on them have about double the crime rate as similarly situated one-block street segments without abandoned buildings on them. And so we have to do something about abandoned buildings in Louisville. Street lighting is a problem not just because crime lurks in the dark, but because of the fear that comes with the dark. As people are not out on the street walking to the corner grocery store, playing with their kids outside after dark, it leaves an opportunity for crime to flourish, and it takes eyes off the street. The final recommendation that came from the LIVE initiative is a narrowly tailored gang enhancement law, and that is based on a law that exists in Ohio right now that would add additional penalties to individuals who perpetuate violent crimes in furtherance of a gang objective or because they are part of a street gang. And so one of the things that we found in looking at the city over that time period was that a lot of our violence is interpersonal violence. It is easy and commonsensical to associate street violence with the drug trade, and those things overlap almost universally. But there is a growing body of research that suggests that most violence is personal and not business related. It is the result of issues of respect, of reputation, and of retaliation. And so ways that we can address that and address that within the gang subculture. And so that's essentially the plan that we've put forward in early 2017. Flash forward to the end of 2017, and we now have another full year of data And there are some encouraging things that come out of that data, and there are some worrisome things that come out of that data. 2017 saw an overall reduction in homicides citywide, but if you break it down by police district, the numbers become a bit more complicated. The 4th district had 33 homicides in 2016, and they had 15 last year. And so they had a reduction of 18 homicides last year. That accounts for our entire 10 homicide drops citywide plus 8. And so if you look at every other police district sans the 4th, we actually had 8 more homicides everywhere else in the city. And so what's going on in the 4th district is very encouraging. I don't have firsthand knowledge of any changes in practice that's going on there. I hope the officers can perhaps speak to some of that. But whatever is going on in the 4th district, if it can be applied to some of the other areas of the city, that's very encouraging. But those reductions in the 4th district do account for not only the majority, but more than the majority of our reductions in violence. And so that's sort of where we are as a city right now.
Good afternoon. I need to just quickly amend my introduction a little bit. I have served as the president of River City FOP's lodge for the last 8 years. I did not seek re-election for a 5th term. We have a new president. His name's Nikolai Jillik. Hopefully you'll get to see and meet him. He's a very, very good police officer, very astute, and will do a good job representing our members. I currently am a legislative agent for our Fraternal Order of Police here locally, working during the General Assembly here in Frankfort. And I serve as the Kentucky National Trustee for the FOP, which means that I sit on the National FOP Board representing the 10,000 FOP members that we have here in Kentucky. So I just wanted to clear up that I am not the president as of January 1st. That's why I'm chipper and my shoulders are a little high. The question, of course, of how do we reverse the trend of these murders in Louisville is a very tough question, and there are vast opinions on how that can happen. I do want to make clear also that I do not speak for Metro government or for the police department. I speak as a representative of the police officer members that the FOP represents. As Josh pointed out, the most important way to decrease violence is to target and find the violent offenders and not only get them off of our streets, but keep them off of our streets. So I'll get right to it. We need some judicial reform. And I don't mean criminal justice reform. I mean judicial reform. We have circumstances, anecdotally, I could tell you hundreds of stories probably over the years that we have violent offenders, persistent felony offenders arrested with guns, with drugs, that literally are released from jail before the arresting officer is off of his or her shift. That happens daily. The last time that I checked with, in the last 2 months I would say, with our FOP counterparts with the corrections department, there were 24 alleged murderers on home incarceration. Let that sink in just for a minute. 24 people charged with murder that are on home incarceration. That doesn't make sense. If being charged with murder does not rate being housed in a detention facility, what does? It's unbelievable to me. And we see it daily on the news. If you watch close enough, you can see these folks being released to home incarceration. It's absolutely ridiculous. There are no deterrents at this point in Louisville to having guns or drugs. There's some inconvenience because you might not get out of jail for a few hours. And then you can be back at it, of course. It is definitely not laughable, but it's a joke. I mean, let's be plain and simple. I'm a pretty blunt person. That is unacceptable. We have to keep these people off of the street. If you look at the 500 and some shootings that we were talking about and the 100+ murders, and you look at those offenders, trust me, a large percentage of the time, that is not their first offense. It's probably not their second, third, or fourth offense, and violent offenses at that, involving guns. That is unacceptable. We have to make it clear as a city that that is unacceptable here. That you will go to jail, you will go to prison, and that you are not welcome in our city. Given enough time, police officers could eventually arrest 99% of all violent offenders. The problem is that they don't stay incarcerated, or they don't stay incarcerated for very long. And until our other partners in the criminal justice system are held accountable and responsible for their part, this is going to be a never-ending circle of violence, because we don't put these people away. And unfortunately, sometimes that means throwing the key away. Some people you just can't rehab. It's unfortunate, but that's the case. I do want to point out that, looking at the holistic approach to this, I don't want to be dismissive of the fact that there are a lot of social programs, some of the things that lead to violence in Louisville, like lack of education, lack of employment, underemployment, poverty, things like that. Those issues do need to be addressed. They are important, but those are long-term, and hopefully 10, 15, 20 years from now, that will have an impact on our violence. But we are living in the here, the right here and now. And we have to have more immediate approaches to that. One of the other things I'd like to mention is that we simply need more police officers. To have the ability, for our city to have the ability to create units, like we've created our 9th Mobile Division, or other units, small units within divisions, or other units to target violent offenders and to get them off of our streets and keep them off of our streets, we have to have the personnel to do that. There are only so many people that we have. And of course, we have to have police officers on the street responding to calls for service. We have hundreds of thousands of calls for service. And in order to be there to serve and protect the public, but also be able to do these things that we need to do to target violent offenders, we have to have personnel. And by personnel, I'm not talking about, let's hire an extra class of police officers. Let's hire 50 next year. We attrit 40, we hire 50, we gain 10. I'm talking about we need several hundred police officers. There are some cities that are very comparable to us. You look at Charlotte-Mecklenburg. At one point, they had 100,000 less residents than us and 400 more police officers. They take a different approach. You have to have police officers on the street. Every officer out there is an ambassador to our city, and that can be a good thing 90% of the time. But we also need police officer ambassadors to be there, to be seen, to let people know that, yes, we're here, and yes, we will protect our citizens, and no, crime is not accepted here in Louisville. It's very interesting. We need some legislative changes as well, of course. Just one anecdotal thing about that. For instance, in Kentucky, attempted murder of a police officer is not considered a violent crime. There's actually a bill before the legislature to make that so, and have those folks have to serve 85% of their time. For example I'll give you is we had a police officer here in Louisville that was chasing a violent criminal. A police officer rounded a corner, and luckily for him, slipped in the wet grass, or he would have been shot 4 times in the chest and face. But the guy missed because the officer slipped and fell. Well, he's out of jail, and that was just several years ago. Okay, so that being said, basically, one of the things that we need to do, we like to say that we're a compassionate city, and that is outstanding. We are a compassionate city. But there needs to be an unwritten addendum to that, and that is, except we have no compassion for those who come here and commit violent crimes. We have to make it clear and not just say it, but show violent criminals, Louisville is not where you want to live. Thanks.
I thought Dave was going to add a few more accolades to his introduction there for a second. I'm glad it was just a revision. First off, I would just like to apologize to Nicole. Communication is something that we supervise pretty heavily and that something we take very serious. So anytime you experienced such a traumatic, unfortunate event. We're very fortunate that you're here to tell us about what happened that day. But communication between our office and our victims is something that we take very important. So we have victim advocate services that we're always looking to improve, and it's something that I'd like for you and I to have a conversation with, so that I can see what your experience was, and it's something that I can take back and improve what we already have in place. And we're always looking to improve that and do more with it. But communications also is kind of the problem with the whole criminal justice system, kind of what Dave hit on. The rise in violence and shootings, it's not just a police problem. It involves the whole criminal justice system, which is the police, the courts, corrections. It's very difficult for us to solve a crime if we don't have people in the community that we form partnerships with and we're able to build stuff. And you take Nicole's case, for example. She was able to live through that experience, and we have a relationship with her where it's still difficult to solve that case, and she can tell you detail for detail what happened. So if you take that case and you look at it as if it were a homicide, we don't have that side of the story, so we have to fill the gap in, and the only way that we can fill that gap in is through communication with people in the community. A lot of times people watch TV and they think that our job's a lot simpler than it really is. The forensics and evidence, that will only take you so far, but you have to have conversation and dialogue with people in the community. Something that Josh hit on is something that LMPD, that we are trying to do with the deter focus. We're focusing on people and places that these crimes occur. I think if you look at what we've been able to accomplish through our overtime in directed neighborhoods and high crime areas, that you can see a reduction in violent crimes in those areas. We do have plan in place to where there's certain things that we're looking at and that we're focusing on, and I think that the best results of that is we've been able to accomplish a 20% reduction in our non-fatal shootings. But again, it's something that it takes everybody to be involved in, and it's not just a police issue, which is one thing that we're also doing is we're focusing with the Office of Safe Neighborhoods and some other groups within Metro government to form a multifaceted approach to trying to decrease violent crimes. And I know there's a lot more that I could hit on as far as what Dave and Josh said, but I know that the main event of this forum is to ask questions, and instead of me standing up here and giving you my opinion on these types of cases, let's go ahead and let's get it going. Let's open up for questions. I'll be more happy to answer any question that anybody has.
The first question is for anyone on the panel, or all on the panel. Chicago and Detroit had soaring homicide rates that are now dropping. New York has its lowest murder rate in decades. What are these cities doing that Louisville isn't?
Yeah, I can take it. I had actually meant to mention this in my opening, is that New York City is probably the most encouraging example of reductions in violence that you can have. New York City in 1990 had just under 2,300 murders. This year they finished with just under 300 murders. And so that was the result of collaborations between the police department at the time, which was Commissioner Bill Bratton, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, the academic community in New York at the time. And what they basically did was a lot of what we've talked about up here, a focus on violent offenders, violent individuals, a focus on areas that needed to be revitalized by the city, and a crackdown in the courts and in prosecutions. I think one of the things that Dave said that is really instructive is if police make arrests, what happens next matters as much, if not more, to your ability to actually deter crime. And so we're actually working on a bill right now to eliminate the use of home incarceration for homicide defendants in the state legislature. And so it's my hope that things like that will bring sort of another piece to the table as it relates to that. But that's what New York City did. New York City basically invented the CompStat system. They invented individual-based policing and neighborhood revitalization. Chicago is more complex. Chicago last year had the deadliest year that it's had, I think ever, 2016 last year, and 2017, the first like 8 months were on pace to surpass that. I don't know if they finished out the year. And so Chicago is a lot more complex. Boston, Massachusetts offers another example. They had a year where they had 12 murders, and Boston is a city that is larger than Louisville is in terms of population. And there are tons of examples of cities that have made progress, and in some cases sustained progress, and it typically is with a model of focus on violent offenders, clean up blighted neighborhoods, revitalize blighted neighborhoods, and make sure that violent offenders stay incarcerated once they're arrested and prosecuted.
Well, one thing in regards to violent crimes and murders that I think is important to note is most times people want the motive to match the crime. And with a murder, there is no more heinous crime, more serious crime than a murder. So you always have expectations that the motive has to be equal to what the crime was. And what you see when you really, it's easy for people to lump 107 murders in a year together, 117 murders, that there must be a common denominator and a pattern. But when you get into each separate case, you see that the motive equaling the crime rarely exists. People, the murders happen for so many different reasons that, it's hard to come up with whatever works in New York or whatever works here may or may not work. Louisville's separate and from all these cities, but even more so than that is each case is separate from the case before or the case after it. So it's something that you have to look at. In Louisville, I want to say that we had probably close to 50% or 30%, and I'll look that number up for you. The murders occurred inside somebody's residence. So from a police perspective, you can't police. It's hard to deter something that happens inside somebody's home. Trust me, we're not doing anything different than any other city. If there was a singular answer or a simple answer, and that's one thing that people always, when I talk about murders or I'm asked questions about homicides, people always expect there to be a simple solution to a simple problem, and that's simply not the case. If there was something that Nashville or Tennessee or anywhere, Detroit, that they were doing that worked, we would do it. In law enforcement, rarely do you reinvent the wheel. You copy whatever works. So, one thing I think that a lot of cities are doing is what we're focusing on now, and that is to identify the people committing the crimes, identify the places where these crimes are occurring, and then you go in there and you try to target those individuals specifically.
There was a comment made earlier regarding the 4th District. Could you elaborate a little bit on why the 4th District has seen such a reduction and whether it's an anomaly or there are certain things going on there? And also maybe explain where the 4th District is.
Well, the 4th District encompasses the Churchill Downs area, the University of Louisville area, it's one of the largest divisions that we have. I don't know if there's a single reason why there was a reduction in homicides. One thing that affects the numbers is if you look at, is it singular incidents with multiple victims, or how many incidents are you having? Sometimes, I think, I would have to go back and look at the exact number, but we've had cases to where we had multiple victims in a singular incident. So that can drive the numbers up or down. But the whole plan, the 4th Division, is doing the exact same plan that all other 8 divisions are doing. So it's just, I don't have an exact answer why the numbers dropped in that specific division. One thing you look at, I think that the 6th Division may had an unusually higher year than normal. And we really don't have, you can't point your finger and say this is why, or this is what's driving the numbers. But all divisions are working the same plan. We're all doing the same thing. And it's the goal of every division to decrease not just homicides, but all crimes.
The next question is for Nicole. Nicole, what would justice look like for you if you could have, what would you want in your case for justice?
I would like for the person to be caught. I would like for the man to be caught. I mean, because I don't know who done this to me or my 4-year-old, so I'm watching my back every second
Thank you, Nicole. Several questions here just related to the courts. I guess one question to kind of encompass it all is how can the circuit courts and the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office as well help address this problem?
Excuse me?
I'll say one thing regarding that. You know, their job isn't easy, and hopefully I didn't give that vibe off. But I will say that, you know, there are issues that affect being able to keep people incarcerated, like space, obviously. And also, you know, our jail houses inmates from around the state until there's room in a state prison for them, which causes some of the backlog of prisoners as well. But if you look at it, the bigger picture of it, we should not allow that constraint to affect violent crime in Louisville. Unfortunately, maybe we have to take a key from some other countries and build up. You know, maybe we need a 40-story jail and not a 3-story jail. The fact of the matter is that it's easy to say that you can't keep people locked up forever, but some people you can, and some people you should. And I'll tell you that another common thing that's said is that you can't arrest your way out of this problem. And I would agree with that for most crimes. You know, everybody can't go to jail. Everybody that breaks into a car can't be in jail forever. You know, everybody that steals can't be in jail forever. But when it comes to violent criminals, particularly murderers and particularly violent offenders that are recidivists, I think the fact of the matter is that we can arrest our way out of that problem. We just have to keep them in jail once we do that. And if the violent offenders are not on the street, then they can't commit the violence. And will there be others? Sure. But eventually they'll get the point. And the point that I was making earlier was you are not welcome here if you are a violent offender. I don't think at this point our city has the will to put that message forward. And I think that's what it's going to take. We have to dissect ourselves. You know, it's easy to say, well, this is a national trend. Crime's going up in most places, maybe not New York. Well, that's great, but that doesn't help us. It doesn't help us that, well, everybody's doing it. You know, it's a trend, you know, a national trend. Well, this isn't a shoe or a video game. Everybody's doing it in California, so now we're doing it here in Kentucky. No, we don't care that crime's going up everywhere else. We want crime to go down in this city. What can we do here to make that happen? I think continuing to put it off on it's happening everywhere, or it's a national trend, or whatever the case might be. Let's dissect ourselves and figure out what we can do here in our city to stop it here. And then we can let everybody else handle themselves and take care of our own problems.
Now, to add to that, one thing about arresting your way out of a problem, because you do hear that a lot when you go to different forums, you go to different things, is it has to be intelligence-led policing. When you're working with an investigative unit like I am in charge of major crimes, when you have all the robbery, homicide, and all the different investigative units, you know, my goal is we're trying to build a partnership, and we're building bridges, and we're trying to you know, gap the communication problem, and we're trying to build good rapport with certain anywhere where we're investigating crimes. And then when you have CompStat, which somebody referenced earlier, CompStat, what CompStat does is it identifies the places where your crimes are occurring. So an old school thought of how police used to work with CompStat is you would identify an area where crime occurs on a regular basis, you would deploy your resources to that area, and you would have zero tolerance, or you would arrest anybody that you came in contact with that violated the law. So it can be counterproductive. If I'm trying to build a bridge and trying to build a partnership, and then, you know, we have policemen going into the neighborhood and they're locking up anybody that violates a crime, then it, or violates the law, then it, you know, it can be counterproductive. So it has to be intelligence-led policing. You have to, and that's why our plan going forward is we want to identify the places where the crime's occurring, but then also you have to identify the people that are committing the violent crimes. And those are the people that we need to arrest, take off the streets, and keep in the jail. So it's kind of, you have to balance that, and you know, it can be difficult, and it takes time to get in, and you need the intelligence to do that type of policing.
I'll say two quick things related to that. First, much like we could use more police officers, we need more prosecutors and public defenders. Just as police caseloads increase, the prosecutor and public defender caseloads increase. And so cases get delayed. As individuals leave, those cases get passed on. And so we need more personnel in those departments as much as we do the police department. And the final thing is that specific to county jails, we need to really rethink the way that we do bail. We don't need an individual whose top charge is public intoxication and they have a $250 bond, but they can't afford that bond, so they sit in the county jail, and then we balance that crowding on the back of 24 homicide defendants. The way we do bail needs to change. We need to move from a system that your means determines your outcome to your offense and your background, your criminal background determines your outcome. And there are states like New Jersey that have done some of this, but we need, as much of a problem as overcrowding is, we can't balance it on the back of our violent offenders, and we have to change the way that we treat our nonviolent, non-serious offenders so that they aren't crowding up some of our county jails.
The next question plays into this earlier one. Why do we have a lower number of police officers than other comparable cities here? And the second part of the question is, hasn't the number of police officers declined for any of the board members?
Here, David, take this one.
I'll touch on that one. One of the things is that if you do look at the rest of the country, in the recent past, Louisville has been a relatively safe place to live and work and play. And we've done about every 2 years, there's a peer city review that we pay attention to in the FOP, and basically it compares Louisville to 8 or 10 cities that are what we call sister cities that are similar to us. Louisiana, Memphis, Indianapolis, places like that. Charlotte, Mecklenburg. And it touches on a whole number of areas, dozens of them. And then it rates the city on how they do, solvability rates, crime rates, number of police officers, number of citizens, things like that. And for years in those studies, about 60% of the time, Louisville would come in first in a lot of those categories, doing more with less, actually. And it's interesting that most of the time, the other 40% of the time that we didn't come in first, we normally came in second, right behind Charlotte Mecklenburg, who also did a pretty good job at that time. So I think that we did have in the past done a good job of trying to combat crime the best that we can, and I think we got used to the fact that this is a safe city. But it's also a philosophy of how you look at your personnel. You have a certain number of personnel that you need to operate your police department on. But then you're also going to have people that are sick, injured, on vacation, in training, whatever the case might be. So you need more people. For instance, Charlotte Mecklenburg. They know they need about 1,300 to operate, so they have 1,600. So that they still have, they're at their maximum operational capacity, even with all those other factors. That's not necessarily the fact here. We may need 11 to 1,300 officers to operate in a maximum efficiency here in Louisville, and that's what we have. But then we have officers that are in training or on vacation or are sick or are injured, and that lowers that number. So I think sometimes that's why it feels like that we don't have enough officers to do all the things that we feel like we might be able to do to combat the violent crime.
This question, I guess, is targeted primarily toward Major Kessinger. Nicole and Major Kessinger, you guys both talked about the communication issue between a victim and LMPD. Could you paint a little more of a picture of how that should go if there is a shooting victim or a family who has lost someone, and then there is the investigation that may last days, weeks, or months? Could you sort of explain how the family typically is kept in the loop and how that communication goes?
Yeah, anytime we have a homicide or a shooting, that case is assigned to lead detective. So the lead detective will be the point of contact that should, in a non-fatal shooting, you deal directly with the victim. In a homicide, you have to establish somebody in the family as the point of contact. Family dynamics are different. There's divorces, people live, the family contact could be anyone from a grandmother to a granddaughter. So you have to establish who the point of contact is. And then one problem that we run into, and this is not the case in the Cole situation because it was a non-fatal shooting, but with a homicide, you'll see that the family's so large that our department establishes contact with one person in that family, and then that person doesn't disseminate information to other people in the family, and then you have other people in the family coming and telling us they're not getting information. So that's something that we deal with on a case-by-case basis. But the way that it should work, anytime an incident like that happens, we have a victim's advocate in our office. So the lead detective will always be the main point of contact from LMPD's homicide unit. We also get the victim's advocate involved to offer services that that the family may need, grief counseling. They partner with hospice. The victim's advocate is really there just to offer services to help the family get through that situation. But any information in regards to the case should come directly from the lead detective to the victim or the family's point of contact. Now, it does get complicated. I am familiar with Nicole's case, and obviously I would not sit here and give the details of the investigation in a forum like this. And sometimes the detectives are really guarded about the information that they release. Just to give you a brief synopsis of a made-up event, say we had a homicide to where the person's hands were tied behind their back. That's a piece of information that we're not going to release to the family because as we go through the investigation, that keeps the integrity of that case intact. So there's some details about investigations that we're not going to give. That would be an example. But for the most part, the lead detective is going to filter all information in a non-fatal shooting to the victim, in a homicide to the point of contact, and the victim's advocate is going to offer the services. Where the breakdown happens and where I see the biggest problem is when that case hits the 2, 3, 4 month mark and there's nothing. Originally, and in Nicole's case, originally we have a suspect right out of the gate, and we're able to eliminate that. So we know, from the beginning that now we're back to, in her case, we have a living victim and we have a 5-year-old witness. And then you go out, you do your neighborhood canvas, and eventually the case becomes cold. So it's hard, I think it's hard for the detective's point of view to contact a victim and say, we're 7 months into your investigation, we know absolutely nothing more today than we did 3 months ago. And that's a hard conversation for that detective to have. And then also, if they don't have any information to update, that's where I think we have to do a better job of getting either a victim's advocate or a supervisor or the detective to say, sometimes even if you don't have any type of update as how the investigation is progressing. Even if we don't have a suspect, you still need to maintain an open line of communication, just so that the victim knows we're still working it, and they know that a lot. The complaint that I get is, my son was killed a year and a half ago. I think you guys have forgot about it because the homicide rate's so high, the shooting rate's so high that you guys have moved on to the next case and nobody's working my case, and that's absolutely not true because the way our unit is structured is we have 26 detectives that, they go up, we call it the bubble, they go up and they pick the next case up. And then they work that case, and that case is their case for life. They'll keep it, the next person on the list picks up the next case. So even though we may have, 117 homicides and 300 or 400 shootings, that lead detective, he's responsible or she's responsible for 25 cases. And your case will be their case for life. So that is probably the number one complaint from a supervisor's point of view is that the line of communication between the victim's family, and the lead detective. And that's something that we are really focused on doing a better job of. That's why, I knew that your case wasn't resolved. I knew that we didn't have a suspect on it, but I didn't like hearing that we've let that line of communication because I harp on that. We supervise that, and we have things in place to keep that going. So, you know, it just, as time goes on, information that you can deliver to the victim or the victim's family, it decreases, and then when it decreases, the amount of contact and conversations, they also decrease. So that's a problem that we face and that we're trying to fix.
This is a question for Josh Crawford. The Pegasus Institute report with, as far as there were voices of victims and survivors and about motivations of a lot of these shootings, can you make a comment about what you discovered in your report or in your investigation?
Yeah, so specific to the Voices of the Survivors work, we released the initial LIVE report close to a year ago now, 8, 9, 10 months ago. And what was missing from that was the experience of people who actually lived through what we talked about. And so we basically gathered together about 60 families that had been either survivors of homicide victims or had themselves been victims of non-fatal gunshot wounds to try to get at shared experiences that they have. The first one, which is a relatively obvious one, is grief. But the intensity and length of that grief, there's some research that suggests that that's actually a longer and more intense period of grief than people who lose loved ones to other things like heart disease or cancer. There is an anger that is experienced both at the event itself and then oftentimes if there's not justice in the case, they experience sort of an additional feeling of injustice. And that can come from within. It oftentimes comes from friends and family members who, you know, talk about how unjust things are and in some cases may offer to retaliate on behalf of the family. And in addition to that, we found that the city of Louisville does have a pretty good set of resources available for survivors, but that there's a knowledge gap for survivors, that survivors don't know how, where, and when to get those resources. And so we looked at some other places and how they do these things, and one of the things that we found was that there are a number of police departments in North Carolina who have sort of full civilian victim services units that have a couple of paid civilian employees, that have a robust volunteer program. Oftentimes those volunteers are survivors themselves who have gone through their programs, and they are both coordinators and caseworkers. And so they sort of serve this communication gap, in part because they can speak the language of being a survivor, and so there is sort of a bedside manner there that there might not be with a detective as well-intentioned as the detective obviously is. And that is their sole role, in that the detective has to go out and investigate and interview witnesses and try to literally apprehend and solve the case. These civilian victim services units are just coordinators and communicators with victims. And so that's something that we think should be funded for LMPD so that LMPD can implement it in the way that it sees fit here for the city, and that's something that Metro Council can do. We also think that, or we also know that Kentucky is one of, I think it's 13 states that don't have any constitutional protections for victims whatsoever. Most states have some sort of constitutional protections for victims that guarantee things like notice of court proceedings, the right to be present at court proceedings, the right to deliver a victim impact statement at sentencing. And there's an effort right now with Marcy's Law to try to bring some of that to Kentucky. And then the final thing that we recommended, and Nicole touched on some of this, and so many of other survivors touched on this, is that there is a huge financial component to this for survivors, but that financial component is almost wholly unique to an individual survivor. For some, it's the inability to work. For others, it's the inability to make a down payment on a new place to live because they want to move out of the neighborhood. For others, it's probate costs because the loved one was an adult and they had property that needed to be divided up. And so we recommend the establishment of basically a private fund that can be flexible enough and individualized enough to meet the individual needs of individual survivors.
So I think we're kind of at time
That you got it,
now.
yeah.
But, yeah. Big hand for all our speakers. Yeah. So we have a speaker's gift. It's a mint julep cup. So start these down the side here. One for each of you. Of course, next month is February, so no lunch meeting, but even better, there's a dinner meeting. It's our annual dinner meeting. It's going to be February 27th at the University Club. Watch your email and watch your mailbox. We're going to send a good old-fashioned printed invitation as well. So watch your email and watch your mailbox. February 27th at the University Club. And we are adjourned. Thank you.